recording. Save your pop tabs, throw them in one of the boxes for Ronald McDonald House. And we're always needing stuff for the blessing. So that was my pre-speech.
Oh, ready?
Now we've got Ben and Anthony to talk to us about appraisal.
Yeah, fun topic. All right, so I'm Ben Mosier. That's Anthony Bunting. I work with Mosier Appraisals here in Topeka. We cover Shawnee County and those counties around us, not including Douglas County. Anthony is about the same.
Pretty much the same.
Yeah, so that's kind of about us. A few things I want to just explain at the beginning because you're going to hear the same answer a lot from us. Our views today can be different from all the other appraisers around town. That's the big thing I want to make sure everybody knows. What I do is different than what Anthony does. I work with my dad. His name's Jeff Mosier. We're partners in our company. What I do is different than what Jeff does sometimes. So a lot of our job is based on opinions, and those opinions are interpreted differently. The other thing is the phrase "it depends" will come up a lot today too. If everything in this industry depends on the house, the market, the location, amenities, all sorts of things. So you're gonna ask a question and I'll be like, well, it depends. And that'll probably be like the 20th time I say that today.
And we hate saying that as much as you hate hearing it.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a Vern Jarbo class, no offense, Vern. We're gonna say it depends because frankly, it does. You could have two houses side by side. That answer might be different on each house. It just is what it is.
Third, we do not have like a magic list of adjustments. There is a specific realtor in here who is fantastic and she always asks me for my list of adjustments. I tell her there is not one. But everything that we do is derived from the market based on statistics we run, knowledge that we have, and things we find out from you guys. And then last, our goal today is to make this more of a conversation, not just me and Anthony talking. We want to know what you guys are seeing, what you guys have questions about. And really just talk about what we can help you guys with and what you can help us with. So from there, Anthony's got a few things to say about FHA requirements that always gets brought up, and you kind of put a list together for you guys.
I did. So you probably came in and saw some handouts back there. If you didn't, they're back on that back corner right when you came in the door. All that list really is a generalized guide on what I get the most phone calls on or what I find the most on FHA appraisals. What gets missed or what we require to come back and re-inspect later. That's not everything by any stretch, and there is no magic checklist anymore on what FHA makes us look at. But they have this handbook 4000.1, which you can access. It's a public document. I've put a couple of snips from that document on that list just so you can kind of see what they read like. For example, one of the big things is chipping paint. In the top of that list, you'll see a bold list. That's the things that I normally get the calls on. So chipping paint's a big item for FHA. We see it on almost every appraisal that we go out on. Be aware the HUD handbook specifically calls that to be required on homes built prior to 1978. Okay, so you're thinking, well, what if I got one called out on one built in 1990? If it's bad enough, or if it's an issue that could affect the rest of the house, FHA also wants us to look at structural integrity and safety concerns of the property. So just because it wasn't built prior to 1978 doesn't mean we don't call out chipping paint. Good.
I'm sorry, can we interrupt with a question?
Yeah.
I
I love questions. Bring them.
Deal.
Yeah.
So, so the question I have, you said if it's bad enough, can you give me an example of that?
Not really. And this is going to be an opinion-based thing. So Ben's different than me. I'm different than other appraisers. For me, you know, if you see a house that's 10 years old and it has a couple of nicks on the door jamb going to the front door and that's it. Not really worried about it. That's where your dog scratched it. I get that. I'm not saying that other appraisers won't flag that. It is an opinion-based thing.
So it depends.
What's that?
So it depends.
Yeah, so it depends. However, just be aware that if you happen to be in a situation where someone's called out something minor, maybe have that in your tool book or your tool bag that technically speaking, the handbook specifically calls out those properties prior to 78, not the recently built properties. Even though a lot of appraisers call it out on every property, it's kind of the safest safety net that we can cast. It's not always necessary. And sometimes it just helps you get educated to have that conversation when you're talking to an appraiser. That's really all I had. If you have questions on that list, ask me now, ask me later, call me later, text me later, whatever. Go ahead.
What about an accessory building, like a little shed out there? If it was 15 years old and has chip and paint,
Yeah, so similar thing. FHA's handbook says it's gotta be built prior to 78 to be hard called. But, and again, that's a public document. That snip on your page that I gave you is the requirement from the handbook. It's pretty clear that it calls out specifically those structures built that age. If you get called out on one, that could just be that all the soffit is starting to rot. That is a separate FHA issue. If it is bad enough that it could start to cause problems with the property, again, it's opinion based, but most of us are gonna call that out if it's something that could lead to further problems down the road, because that's what FHA wants us to do. That's what they've mandated.
I was specifically asking about the requirements.
Same thing.
A shed, that even if it's on the property,
Yeah, it's the same as.
Really, anything on the property, it's building paint, doesn't matter what it is.
Give me the mailbox post.
uh,
Honest to God, not kidding. I know it's dumb. There's a couple things that have changed over the years with FHA, which I kind of noted in that page. GFCI outlets, for example, used to be a requirement that they had to be installed within 6 foot of a water source. That is no longer part of the HUD handbook. However, most of us as appraisers look at that the same way. If it's a safety concern, we're gonna call it out. For example, a bathroom sink with an outlet right on top of it, pretty normal, probably needs to be GFI protected. That could be a GFCI breaker. If it is, let us know, label it in some fashion. But just be aware, there's changes to this handbook all the time. And we try to stay on top of them, but trying to memorize a 4,000 page document and then staying up with the current changes is challenging. So we do the best that we can. But if you ever have questions, definitely ask Norma.
But the gutters on a detached garage,
What's that?
guttering on a detached garage.
I personally would not call that a requirement if the grade is functional. Guttering is a strange issue because one of the requirements for FHA is that the grading be positive and drainage be positive away from the structure. So if there's no guttering and it's a big roof that goes right down into a big sloppy pit with the drainage coming right at it, probably have a problem there. But if it's landscaped and at the edge of the eaves, it drops down and it's sloped hard away and it's all grass up to it, it's probably not an issue. So that's gonna be a case by case scenario.
But that's no big deal.
You want the gutters to be extended away from the home, the downspouts to be extended away from the home, especially if it's reasonably flat or not that well graded. Again, grading is something that they call for, so that it needs to be positive drainage away from the home. So if a gutter goes,
I was still thinking about flash blocks.
I think as long as your downspouts are extended away with the grading, then you're okay. I mean, a splash block, all that does is takes the vertical water pressure and makes it horizontal pressure. And a downspout extension does the exact same thing, so. Yes, sir.
go ahead.
I just want to know if there was a certain length for the downspout.
I don't know the requirement on it. For me, like on my rentals, I do 3 to 6 feet. But again, it's gonna be a case by case, and if you have a property that is just flat for 20 feet, it might need a little bit more than one that's sloped pretty hard away.
Could those potentially be called out for trip hazards?
Trip, I don't know. No, trip hazards are related more to like structural concrete offsets, unmarked small landings, things like that. So no, that'd be separate.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to go on a tangent, but I didn't know if you wanted to talk at all about the difference between VA and FHA, because those used to always be considered the same, but obviously VA is the village, especially on the exterior paint, because like VA shows out all exterior paint services, WGA or either way.
And I will say, I'm not a VA appraiser. Okay, so I'm FHA only, so I can't talk to that. You are, I think Ben is. So if you guys have any input, throw it out there.
And I just point that out, because what you said, I don't mean to come
Sure.
with VA, does say all exterior paint surfaces, because they want anything that could be weather related. So
Yeah.
there's just no sort of difference, I guess. between
Yeah,
VA and
absolutely.
FHA.
Yeah, definitely. But that's my spiel on FHA. If you have questions, throw them at us, but. Most of what I plan to do today is field questions just like those. So if you have questions, I'm gonna open myself up to them for the next hour.
Do you have that list that we start off with, or you want to just let them throw them off?
I can grab them back there, but
If you have questions,
no, actually, no, it's
start
in my
shooting them
phone.
out.
It's in my,
or we have a list of about 6.
Yes, Miss Katie Saltz took it upon herself to send a list to us this morning.
What's your name?
Yeah. So, okay, question one that we got ahead of time was, can we get a list of things that FHA and VA often sees? That list is really more FHA than VA, but a lot of those things overlap. So you're gonna see kind of both of those things. Do appraisers take county appraisal into consideration when appraising a home with county appraisals rising? No. So I understand the county appraisal is a benchmark for a lot of us, and different hat, appraiser, realtor, I get it. So you kind of look at that as a benchmark, but when we're valuing a home, we base that completely on sales data specific to that market. What we do and what the county does are not exactly the same things. They kind of parallel each other, but they're different. A lot of times with us in the secondary market requirements, we can't go back more than 12 months. The county can go back longer. Mass appraising is its own field within our field of study. If we were to do some of the things that mass appraisers, like your county jurisdictions do, we'd get in trouble really quick. So we do not put any merit in that value whatsoever. Although as a realtor, I understand it is a pretty good benchmark to at least start with and work backward. 3, do appraisers look at associated docs? I forgot about this one. For example, if a home is noted with a defect, is it more likely for an appraiser to call it out as a requirement? I'm going to give you the correct answer. Yes. We should. If it's a public facing document on the MLS, and all we have to do is click a little button with a D on it, and it gives us a seller's disclosure, and it says the roof is actively leaking, but the seller's not fixing it. As a realtor, you're thinking, hey, okay, we're signed off on that. We don't have to, we know about it, we're not repairing it. Depending on the type of loan, depending on the lender, those underwriters, we may still have to require it. We are already going to have to note it because we know about it. Whether or not it has to be required is based on what loan you're getting, what banker you're using, lots of variables there. But yes, we do look at those associated documents, or should if they are public facing. If they're hidden in someone's safe or you never posted them and we don't have access to them, that's different. We assume everything to be functional to an extent. But generally speaking, if it's a document, we try to look at it. What values are given on pools, shops, etc.? 80. No magic answer. It's a contributory value and it is market based. What you'll see is pools might give a significantly different value if it's, let's say, a lakefront home on Sherwood versus a home on 3 acres in the Seaman School District. They always do vary. I will say that reasonably speaking across the board, they have been contributing more since about the year 2020 than they ever did beforehand because of the work from home and a lot of those amenities like pools and super amenities, shop buildings and things have been contributing more than they used to. So that's,
Can I ask a question?
yes, you sure can.
So what would you say is a range of value that's added to it?
Well, I mean, you got to think about that. If you have a home that might be worth 50,000 and it has a $120,000 pool, that's going to be significantly different than a home that's $2 million and it has a $300,000 pool. So that range of value could be anywhere from 0 to infinity. I know that's a non-answer. I get it. I don't like those either. I get it. I don't like them either. But it's just impossible to say because.
Well, the reason why I asked that question, because when you're trying to give value to something, when you're doing comparable for
Yeah.
yourself, it's hard to have, if you had an idea of
Yeah.
some kind of a range.
Yeah.
Between a $300,000 and a $400,000 home, and
Sure.
you've got a pool that they spend $150,000 on, where is that value lie? I mean,
So-
how do you arrive at that?
Yeah, so, and actually Ben and I had a conversation about this probably a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think you're the one that brought this up. It was the Southwest neighborhood on Sherwood, like Arthur's
Yeah.
and like off of 41st.
Ambassadors, that there's some good. What we do to determine our adjustments is called a paired sales analysis. So we try to find a house that's similar with the pool. We try to find a house that's similar without the pool. And then see what the market paid extra for that pool. So for me, I use a percentage of the sale price for my pool adjustments. And I've got a list of probably 15 sales that I can prove that if I need to do
Yeah.
that.
Give you an example. We looked at one 2 years ago. And I think Ben had found that on this property, it was like about a 7% adjustment. So on that particular property, that pool was contributing around $25,000. But that's not gonna apply to every neighborhood. It's not a blanket adjustment. It's just every time we find, when we do our best to find sales within that neighborhood, or if there isn't one, we look at similar competing neighborhoods that maybe they're across town, but maybe they're similar in appeal, style, age, all of that. And we'll try to just figure out, generally speaking, what are these two houses worth and what did that pool bring on top of
And
it?
generally, we'll have like a range of adjustments, and if that pool's got saltwater pool or it's got a whole bunch of landscaping around it, we might tear up to the 10% versus the
Yeah.
5%. It just depends on all the extra things that are going on with
Yeah.
the spa
Is
built
that
into
maybe
the
a
pool.
call to you guys when doing the listing and say, hey, I've got this property here.
You certainly can.
There.
The only thing that I mean, we get it. We all get busy. Everyone in this room gets busy. And when you do get busy, if you guys are trying to get a house on the market tomorrow morning and you can't reach us today, maybe we'll call you back tomorrow afternoon. Usually what happens is if we miss you, you've already went with your gut feeling, you've listed it. And you said, hey, I went with this. And it's like, well, that's okay. That's reasonably normal. Okay, gotcha. Technically, we can't really give you values of homes over the phone. We try to be helpful when we can, but anytime that, as a realtor, okay, I got two hats, right? So if I put my realtor hat on, I can talk to you about values. And this is a really weird line with appraising in real estate. If you call me as an appraiser, I can't tell you what I think that house is worth. Because that verbally is an appraisal report. There's reporting requirements on that. I've got to have a work file built. There's a lot of governing bodies that frown on me doing that. So generally speaking, we can try to help you as best we can with like certain type things and point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we probably can't say, hey, that house is worth between 290 and 318.
Oh, I'm just saying to help with
Yeah.
the adjustment
Yeah.
for the external.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we will try, but it's just keep in
I
mind.
mean, I'll
we get
do
Crazy busy.
is send some comps saying like,
Sure.
that way I don't have to give you a concrete number, like, these 3 houses sold for 205,000. There's 2 houses with a pool that sells like 250,
Oh.
260, and then you can kind of draw your conclusions from that.
Yeah.
All right, okay, do appraisers know if there are closing costs added to the purchase price? Maybe the purchase price is $7,000 over list price because the buyers add their closing costs to the deal, and does that make a difference when an appraiser is trying to find a value? All right, so with regard to closing costs, we are concerned about what the market value of the home is. So if you add 7,000 to the price to get $7,000 in closing costs, we do have a copy of the contract. We're supposed to have a copy of the contract. And if you've changed it later and added those closing costs in, there should be an amendment to that contract or an addendum, and that should also be sent to us. That does not always happen, but it should. And if it does, that does not affect our final value one way or the other. If our value was going to be $100,000 and I'll be damned, you're gonna pay 5,000 in closing costs now and it's 105, our value should still be $100,000. Our job is to give you an objective opinion of value that is supportable by market data. So if something were to come up last minute and change on the contract side, that doesn't mean that our value is going to change. In fact, it shouldn't make our value change.
We make adjustments to comparables only. We don't adjust the subject, which
Yeah.
is something that gets mixed up. So we have our subject, say you got a $200,000 house at 5,000 closing costs. We're not taking 5,000 off the subject. We're only adjusting our comps to help us get a value of the subject. So if the comps support the house with the closing costs added in, then
Yeah.
that's what our market value is gonna be.
Does anybody have any questions on that? That's kind of a weird one. I call a lot. Yeah.
So I ran into a situation recently where there's a resell by owner, and they have a relative who is a real estate agent. And they didn't trust her comps, so they hired a private appraiser to come out. They came out, gave subject property a price. We did the comps. I have a buyer to bring to this deal. And I told her, I said, hey, I'm struggling to get to this price. What comps did you use? She goes, I gave them comps. They're going off their private appraisal. How do you bridge that gap in a conversation with a private appraisal versus the comps that we do? And then, I did a 5 mile radius because of rural property. And, it's almost a $500,000 property. I can't find the number that they're asking for in the 6 month comps that I'm seeing. I even look in more.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's tough because they don't have to share the appraisal, obviously.
They did.
Oh, they did share with you? So you gotta see the comps?
Sold.
Yeah.
And then one of them was almost 6 months old.
Got it.
And so, I went back to her and I'm like, hey, this is really tough for me to say because the bank is gonna, my guy's love. If he's gonna look, the comps aren't gonna match either, and they can't use two of those three.
Why can't we?
Because they're over 9 months old. That's, they've told me that they objectively like to stay to the 6 months with this particular lender, because I asked.
So we'll get into that discussion real quick. The time frame on comps is not a real thing. We as appraisers, I mean, it's a regulation that we have to use 3 comps within 12 months. But if I need to support a property and there's a perfect comp that was 15 months ago next door, and all I need to do is adjust for time, then I'm gonna use it. So if you read in the report, it's like the market's stable, I think a 9-month-old comp is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's been a lot of times specifically with pools, super amenities like shop buildings, maybe a big pond. I just did one the other day where I had a 4th comp and I went back 2 years. Obviously, there was some time adjustments going on there, but I had to support a watershed sale. There's no recent sales. You use what you can use based on market data. That's all you can do. So I would focus, I mean, yes, most recent is always a good idea. I mean, there's your good answer because the market is constantly changing. Even in a stable market, it's moving a little. So recent is good. But on unique properties, like I know you sell a lot of, I would just do what you can do, find whatever sales you can find. How do you bridge that gap? That's challenging. I mean, as an appraiser myself, if I do an appraisal and I come in at a value and you say, well, how about this comp? And it's a comp that I've already looked at in 1 second, I'll shout at you. And I see, maybe I've seen that already and I discounted it for something that I knew about already. Maybe they sold it to their sister or the basement was falling in, something happened. That's one thing. But what if I missed it? What if when I was doing my search, because I was kind of distracted that day, maybe I missed that sale completely. I will always reconsider sales.
Yeah.
Now some appraisers don't have that opinion. I will reconsider a sale or a report at any time. I'm never gonna say, no, yours, that's my value, it's mine.
And we'll take, I mean, Anthony and I are in the same boat on this. I will take any sort of information you have.
Yeah.
If you've got comps, if you've got your CMA, if you've got private information, I'll take it all. There's been times where I'm sure it's happened to you where I've sent a report in and they're like, well, what about this house that sold next door? It sold on the county and I didn't see it on the county, but
Yeah.
I can then verify it was a true arm's length transaction. I'll go in and change my value if it actually helps. And I know that there's some people around that won't do that at all.
Yeah.
So
What do you mean by time adjustment?
market conditions adjustment is what it's
Before
called.
we get into that, hang on, I put Janet on hold.
Oh, sorry.
Janet,
What do you use for time adjustment?
same question. Okay. Perfect.
It depends.
Yeah, that is an ever moving target, if we will. Target's probably a bad word to use here. Through COVID is probably the most recent example in everyone's mind. The market was increasing and it was increasing at a different rate with regard to each specific market in town. The Shunga Creek market between Gage and Fairlawn was not the same as Lakefront on Sherwood. So the best that we do is you research a market, and actually Fannie Mae is kind of looking at us right now and they're cracking down on was it Fannie or Freddie? One of them is cracking down on how we do these time adjustments. And what they're saying is, hey, you can't just say the market increased 15% a year, unless that's actually what it did. But if you look at it and you find that it increased 10% from January to April, and then only 6% from May to December, you need to reflect that. So that's kind of how we have to break it down. We look at it, we look at the market. I look at the market year over year. And I say, okay, what's the median sales price change? Then I narrow it down to specific, the same type of homes, like a comparable list, maybe 20 houses. And I find that maybe that value, instead of being a 10% year over year change, that value is only 8%. Then I might break it down by quarters. I say, what's sold in this quarter, this quarter? It's challenging to pin one of those down. It really is. And it takes a lot of time, but it is but it is doable. And we're probably not as exact on that as market data should be, but there's really just no way to be exact. If a market is increasing between 8 and 12%, we might call it 10. If it's 9.2, really, really hard to support something like that. So it varies. Right now, I can tell you that in most Topeka markets, I am not adjusting for time at all from, in the last 9 to 12 months, I'm not doing that. But on the one that I went back 2 years, I had a pretty substantial one. So, go ahead.
So let's say on the subject property, there are houses haven't sold, let's say in the last 9 months or more.
Mhm.
And does the number of offers that subject property receives affects the desirability? Is that taken content when you're doing your appraisal?
It's good information that the like additional offer or like a multiple offer situation where it drives the price up. Yeah, I mean, we take that information into account. But if, you know, it's kind of a supply versus demand type of thing. So if we see that there's been no homes that sell here for 9 months and then you put one on the market and it gets 5 offers on it, we'll have to take that into account. But then we can only use, we're always looking kind of in the past when we're doing our appraisals, because that's all we have is the past data. So we kind of have to use that past data to help support the sale price. Do you have a,
How's that communicated to you?
by calling the agent and being like, this property is listed for 95,000, why is it contract price for 110? How many offers did you get?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of
And if you
times.
want to initiate it, I've been telling people to tell me, like, if I don't ask for it and there's something, if you've got 5 and offers on it, I wish our MLS would be able to show that. Some MLSs around the country do show the number of offers.
You could add it to public remarks. Amanda,
Yeah.
shoot me. Is Amanda still in here? I don't know. I think you can. Agent
Yeah.
remark, yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can.
And yeah, I think so. I think, you know, part of our appraisal process is forecasting and projecting demand. And that is a part of that process is, okay, hey, there's clearly a demand here. 5 people made an offer on this. If the same home comes for sale next door, you've still got 4 people out there looking. So we're forecasting out saying, well, this demand exists. So it absolutely does help just show us that the market is showing us this data, listen to it.
Especially when it's for sale by owner.
Yes, yeah, especially then, you're right, because it didn't get the same exposure. But, one second, Amanda, but if it, ultimately, our hands are tied usually due to the secondary market on what we can do if the sales don't support it. There's different lenders that have different requirements, but a lot of times if it's selling to Fannie or Freddie, for example, not to slander the big two, but if they sell to them, they have rules that we have to follow, even if we don't necessarily agree with them, to be perfectly honest with you, what's out there.
Just because there was a question about hot sheet comments. So when you change the status or something, when you change the square footage and you go to save your changes, you'll get a little spot where you can enter comments. Those comments only go to the hot sheet report. So if you want to let other people know that there were multiple offers when you're putting that under contract, put that in like agent remarks instead of the hot sheet comments. Nobody's gonna find you once that property comes to the hot sheet.
Makes sense. I'm gonna address this one. I'll take the bullet. Though Katie's last question that was sent from her office earlier was, I'm just gonna throw you under the bus. I'm sorry every time. Why are we seeing more requirements on conventional appraisals? I will be honest with you.
Great question.
It is a good question. I don't know because I don't do it. Conventional loans, again, depending on your lender, if it's a secondary market lender, they may have different things that they point out. When we send them pictures, which they require certain photos, we might have no requirements. An underwriter, whether that person is 19 years old or 72 years old, underwriters are just people with jobs. They're no God, okay? But in the lending world, they kind of are. They look at our photos and they go, you know, we saw a little bit of paint missing on that handrail. We need you to require it. I didn't require it. My value is my value. My value is as is, it's worth this. But a lot of times underwriters come back and go, no, you need to require this. So a lot of times, not a lot of times, sometimes requirements do come from the bank themselves, not from us. With that said, on a conventional loan, primarily you're concerned with structural, and there's different types of loans. There's investor loans when they're do this and that, and there's 5% down people, first-time home buyer loans. I don't flag something unconventional that I don't believe is a structural concern for the property. If there's a missing sheet of shingles on the back of the house, a piece this big, I still might not require that, but I'm obligated to note it and report it. the lender then might require it. Now, if I walk into the basement and the walls are coming in 3 feet, they've never been braced, the grading sucks, I can see it's a current problem, I'm gonna require further inspection or evaluation by a qualified professional. I know there are some appraisers that do not share my opinion on this, and I just hope they are not watching this video. But I'm seeing it on my sales as well, and I don't know why, because it shouldn't be happening, in my opinion.
I share the same.
About the zoning things that I ran into.
Oh, yeah, that was a doozy too. You share it, it's your story, you share it and I'll piggyback.
But the district is commercial. And so underwriter didn't want to go ahead and do it because if the house is destroyed 50% or more,
Yeah.
it would take a variance from the planning department to be able to build it back up as residential, and they want to protect their loan.
Yes, and ultimately that situation comes up a reasonable amount on busy thoroughfares like 10th Street, for example. It comes up in industrial areas like where HME is expanding up on, by Goodyear. In those situations, it is lender based and a local portfolio lender may not require that. They might just go, yeah, it's good. We're fine with it. A secondary market lender, they're all different, but one of them might come back and at the last minute go, we're not allowing that. That is totally up to the lender because at the end of the day, when we're giving your market value, that market value is the market value the way that it sits when we looked at, or the effective date. It's up to the bank whether or not they give the loan. That is a pain in the ass, to be perfectly honest, because sometimes the city and or county, whoever the municipality is that governs it, sometimes they will write you a letter that says, you're good to go. This house is grandfathered, it pre-exists zoning, it's fine, it can be rebuilt. Sometimes they'll tell you that on the phone, but then will refuse to put that in writing because they don't want the liability, because they don't want to lose their job. That's what's really frustrating. And it happens a lot. They'll tell you, yeah, this one's okay. Send me an email. Yeah, I'm not doing that. And if you're in that situation, you're just in a tough spot and that's out of our control. That's truly of the municipality that governs it and or your underwriting. And if your underwriting is going to be butt heads about it, might be time to look at someone who can portfolio lend it. Like,
You have to click the zoning map before you find the DP status, and that's where the appraiser found it when they did their appraisal. So you, just a word warning, you might want to double check both of those when you're doing your listing.
and with that said, this is a little quirk of the zoning here in Shawnee County. If you are on the appraiser's website and you click zoning map, that's a pretty good tool. That is going to be different than if you go to your GIS map and put the zoning filter on. That is going to be different than if you go to the city of Topeka's zoning map, which is on their website. And the city of Topeka's zoning map is going to trump all of those things if you're within the 3-mile limit, which is in town in the surrounding area. So the city of Topeka's zoning map specifically is the god, if you will, on that process, as long as it's a city of Topeka or surrounding property. So, yeah.
So I have one more question on the conventional that's getting flagged for stuff. A lot of the ones we're seeing have in the requirements. So as an appraiser, do you guys have the ability to fight that and say, no, I don't agree with that. This is my value without that. Or are you kind of required to go with what the underwriters are asking you to do?
That is a weird question, but I understand what you're saying. I'm gonna be honest, the way that I do it, which makes a lot of lenders unhappy, is I will go back and I'll put it in the report as a requirement and I will name that person. And they do not like that, because they don't want to be named. But I've done it multiple times and I'm sorry, it's their requirement. And I put in there, when this happens to me, my value is my effective value. I'm fine without the requirement. The bank, Amber Smith, is requiring per an email dated this, that this be looked at. I even usually don't check this as a requirement of the appraisal. I just note it in there and bold it that the bank wants it required. That is me being a dick, to be perfectly honest, but I don't like it.
So the lender is blaming you guys. They're
Yeah.
coming back at us and saying, sorry, the appraiser required it.
Yeah.
And then we're calling you and you're like, no, actually, the lender required it. So.
Yeah, and it goes both ways. We blame the lender blames us, just like in real estate, you forgot to schedule a closing, whose fault is it? It happens. But yeah, it's a bad situation and we all probably handle it differently. I mean, how do you do it? I'm sure it's happened to you.
I would say I use the automatic method.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So. It just, the secondary market and underwriters have so over governed the way that we value properties that a lot of times we can't even, in my opinion, do our job as well as we should be able to. For a long time, our adjustments had to stay under 25 and 15%. Line items had to be under 10% or they'd get flagged. And we couldn't do it. It was just a hard no. When that's a problem, because if you have a remodeled house versus, and all your comps are not quite as nice, but they're remodeled, it still needs an adjustment. And they're like, no, you have to bracket it. Well, we can't. So sometimes there's a case where it is the nicest home. And depending on your lender, they may not let us do all positive adjustments and say, this is the nicest home. It's worth more than this. Our job is to support it on both ends, nicer, worse, all of it. But sometimes that's just not possible. That is just a really easy example of how they're overstepping on their governing of us. But that happens in a lot of different areas of how we do things and how we type reports. It's not always us.
I have another question too.
Yeah.
I have a flipper who's contemplating adding garages to some of their homes that, don't sell as well. What kind of value can they see getting this a single standard and garage?
Tough to say. See, I changed my wording there, so it wasn't as bad. Yeah, it does depend. It's tough because there are some markets in Topeka where truly a garage might only add $3,000. And there are some markets where it's pretty close to $20,000. So it's really challenging. And on new builds, it could be even more than that. So it really just depends on your market. The best I can say is look at your market, try and find sales that don't have the garage they're wanting to add. See what those are bringing, try to find similar homes. Or call me and I'll try to find similar homes. And then you can kind of back into what it would be if it was this house that's like it with one and wasn't like it without one and figure it out. But
So
yeah,
there used to kind of be a list out that's like single car was 15.
there was, yes.
That was back in the day.
Yes, I've seen this list.
That guy's been.
It should never have ever existed. Because it's not the same. It's not the same. The market changes every minute of every day, but generally speaking, in a stable market, what I say about where you live right now should be about the same as what I say next month. However, since it is ever changing and different between where you live, where Debbie lives, that's why we shouldn't put a list together because it's misleading. Because if you say a garage is worth $10,000, that's just in your mind now. So every time you price a sale, you're going to use $10,000. What if you're in a market where it's only 3? Or what if you're in a market that it's 20? It just makes you do your job worse. I understand the theory behind a list for you guys. I get it because it is at least a benchmark to work backward from. That's not how we do our jobs and it just shouldn't be how we advise you either. Sorry, that's a crappy answer, but that's the truth. If,
As long as you're talking about conventionals, I don't know if it's worth bringing up about the increased appraisal waivers and hybrid zoning.
yeah.
Agents to know who you're letting in the house in terms of like Uber drivers that might be doing hybrid
Yeah.
property data collectors.
Yeah, it is.
We haven't really seen a lot of that in this market. Have you? I mean, we don't really see that a lot like we see it when you enter bigger Kansas City metro markets.
It's like, the rest of us, nobody.
So, there's a new thing called, are you talking about like hybrid appraisal, stuff like that?
Property data collectors.
So there's a new product that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac have. It's called a hybrid appraisal where they will hire a property data collector to come out and look at your house. They'll bring their iPhone in and take a picture of every single room, every single closet, underneath their pantries. They'll do it all. It'll take them an hour and a half. They send that information to us to do the appraisal. And then we have to do the appraisal based on their data, which I personally don't do. I won't do it.
I don't do it either.
It's a pain. It's very hard to value a house for me without stepping inside the house, just to get a feel for it. So anyways, there's been some issues with property data collector. So if this situation comes up, you need to vet the property data collector. You need to make sure they don't have any sort of background or stuff like that. Is that kind of where you're?
Yeah, just because I know there's issues.
Yeah.
We've had in Lawrence where people, they don't actually say they're an appraiser, but they kind of give the impression like we're doing the appraisal.
Yeah,
But
they're not licensed in any sort of way. They're just there to take a bunch of pictures of your house.
Yeah.
And I don't see them often on sales. I've seen a lot of them on refinance type of loans.
I had one on, it was a for sale by owner, he flipped the house, it was originally a 3-bed, 2-bath ranch, and then he added 5 bedrooms and added a whole new bathrooms, and did a lot of work to it. So like, they came in, and they were like, hey, we're gonna just do a drive-by appraisal, and I was like,
No.
I literally called him, and I was like, this is all the photos, and I gave a list of everything that the seller did to update the house.
And a lot of times it's gonna be for your big national lenders, your big ones, or they'll have an AMC that I don't want to get into that conversation about, but
This was
they
landmark.
did a hybrid or
Yeah.
or an exterior.
No, it was landmark.
Yeah, there's a push right now, and they're doing it, to reduce the required loan to value
Yeah.
that requires an appraisal. Which basically means there will be less appraisals done on homes that are selling, I guess, and a better, not really a better way to say it. I get it. I mean, I get it. As a lender, that makes your process a little easier, saves the borrower a little money. What I'm seeing with a couple of the banks that I know they're doing it is a lot of times they're still charging the borrower for the appraisal. Or they're calling it something different, maybe a property evaluation fee or something. So the borrower is usually not saving any money, or minimally. They might be saving $150 out of the $7,000 they're about to spend. But what you're getting is a product that is not nearly the same. There's a valuation company that does these. They pay people to go look at the home, and then all they do is someone sitting in New York, they click go, it generates a product, it spits it out and says, this is the value. And then on the second page, in tiny print, like size C print, it says, this is not an appraisal, nor is it a home property valuation. This is a property inspection report. But on the front page in bold, it's 3 sales, an active listing, and likely home sale price, bam. So these banks are charging their borrowers $250 instead of $450 to get this product, and then they don't have to do an appraisal. Basically exactly what it is, to be honest. In fact, they quote, I think they use like Realtor.com, RPR, they just put the values on there, and then they average them, spit them out, and put this number on there. So, I mean, I did a HELOC on my own rental, and they asked me if I wanted to spend $200 for that, or if I wanted to spend $500 for an appraisal. I spent $500 for an appraisal, and I actually sent these guys out to do it, so, because they wouldn't let me do it myself. I think that's crap.
I want to add something. So I didn't want to bring this topic up, but does anybody know what an AMC is? It's an appraisal management company where they basically act as the middle person between the lender and us. I would advise you, if you're using a large national lender, to just review your closing statements and see how much they charge you for an appraisal. Because a lot of times they will send it through an AMC, and then the AMC will ship it out to a group of appraisers fishing for the lowest and quickest turn time. Anthony and I don't really participate in that. But it can lead to poor appraisal. So I just want you all to be aware of that it's kind of something that's becoming more common, where I've seen $700 for an appraisal that is charged to the borrower, but the appraiser only get paid $375.
I see.
The AMC is getting half that fee, and they're doing absolutely nothing.
I see $900 and $950 all the time on those, even $1,100 on one.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what they're doing is they're trying to find the cheapest appraiser to go out and do it. And generally speaking, that's usually not an appraiser that's familiar with the area, or maybe someone who doesn't do a 1 report a month. You're not getting, and a lot of times they lead to problems, to be perfectly honest. That's where you get those requirements and things. But definitely look into that, because if your borrower is going to a lender, you know, you guys as agents know that it's your job to look out for your client. And if your client is paying $1,000 for an appraisal when the market rate might be $500, it might be something to think about and chat with them about. So
A lot of times that fee is going to a middleman who does absolutely nothing but
Yeah.
harass us.
they just order it and harass us, and then require things that we don't require.
Is there a website that you can go through to identify, because like with us, you know, like we have like the sunflower, and there's like the more, and then, you know, that case, the RER. So you can find out like who are the agents in the area. Is there a website that you can see, like, where is that appraiser originally from? Because I had one where it was here, but the appraiser was from St. Joe, Missouri,
Yeah,
coming over here, doing my appraisal. And didn't even communicate with me. He's like, I can get in there. And I was like, okay, great, I'll meet you over there. He showed up, luckily, thank God, and found out with the ring doorbell. He came 2 hours before he told me to and was in and out, gone, and appraised it, which was nice, because, I mean, yes, it was nice. It was like no conditions, no nothing. And I'm like, you didn't see the crack in the
Yeah.
side of the house over here. Didn't see nothing. And the agent, she's a friend of ours, obviously. She told me, she's like, oh, you got a price for like 20,000 over. And I'm like, I'm sure I
Yeah.
was to make the price that we were at. He didn't have a clue.
There's not.
You could, you could maybe go to the Kansas State Real Estate Appraisal Board website and just see where their office is.
You could filter by, like, you could search for Topeka and see what offices are in, or Lawrence, or wherever you're at.
But it doesn't show the geographical area that everyone covers.
So there's a rule for us that we have to follow in our USPAP called geographic competency. And that means that we are not supposed to appraise a property of any type in an area that we are not geographically competent or know about until we've taken the steps necessary to understand that market. Which is why I would never appraise a home in Wichita. I don't know that market, or Manhattan. I just wouldn't go there. I'm not saying there aren't appraisers who aren't able to do that, but I'm not that guy. On my own personal home, when I bought it, they brought an appraiser in from Manhattan and they compared, I do not live on the lake. Okay. Wish I did. They compared my home to 4 homes that were all lakefront and they gave it a $5,000 site adjustment. That site adjustment at that time was $300,000. So they were not geographically competent. So that's the kind of stuff you run into, good or bad. You might have a situation like yours where it's like, hey, yeah, it worked out great. Or you might have one the opposite where they compare it to homes just in different neighborhoods. They don't know. We don't know. That's why we don't go other places. So what I do on my own listings, usually I know an appraiser's name if it pops up, but if I don't, I just go to Google and I say, hey, who is this guy? And it pops up and says, well, this guy is out of Emporia. What? Yeah, like, and county served. Shawnee's not even one of them. What are you doing here? So that's what I do, is I Google and cross-reference that. But yeah, there's no master. I wish there was. I could create that. That could be your money right there.
Or you can ask them, be like, how often do you work in Topeka? And
Yeah.
how well do you know the market and stuff like that, but there's nothing you can do about it once they have it.
You see it too with the larger lenders.
Yeah, it's mainly the big national lender that issue comes up.
Yeah. Sorry, 1 second, Janet. So,
All right, I don't think that is, you have to keep in mind is office address can sometimes be an issue.
Yeah.
It's an issue for me here. I've been working in Topeka for 20 years, but we don't actually have an office in Topeka.
yeah, that's true.
We're in an office in Florida.
Yeah.
That's why our numbers in Sunflower have been forever. And I think what you said was great. It's about geographic competency, not about necessarily where you're going.
Yeah.
Because maybe you sell homes in places that you don't live, even that doesn't mean.
Yeah.
So I think,
Sure.
I think the question you asked is, hey, how often do you speak a lot? I
Yeah.
think that's probably the more important question.
And then if you feel like you have an issue with the appraiser, you can notify the lender and be like, hey, I talked to this guy. He has only done 5 appraisals in Topeka in his career. He probably doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
And then you can go from there.
Janet.
At one point in time, the lenders were calling for second appraisals of properties. Want to go through that, explain that, we didn't still do anything.
They've changed you wanna do
Oh, the only thing that I see it on a lot is like an FHA flip. If you flipped it, and I don't know what the rule is, if you guys are.
within like 6.
I think it's
6
6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So then you have to have a second appraisal done. And then the second appraisal is a conventional appraisal.
Yeah.
Conventional guidelines appraisal.
Lenders sometimes when the value, the lender didn't agree with the value or whatever, they were called for.
There's a new process, not a new process, but it's relatively new. It's a revision of values, which if your buyer is upset with the value of the appraisal or if it's for refinance or something, you can submit a formal revision of value or revision of value to the lender. But to do that, you need to have data to support why you're doing it. They're not gonna just say, we don't like this value, tell the appraiser to try again. You need to come with comps, you need to come with full statements on what was wrong with the appraisal and stuff like that. But it is a relatively new standardized process now that you can do. If you feel like you got a bad appraisal or didn't get the data that you think deserved to be in that appraisal.
And a lot of you already know this, but our client is not necessarily who's paying us or who we meet there. Generally speaking, our client it's who engages us. So typically with your situations, the lender is our client. So if you are the seller's agent, you are so far dissociated from that process that it's not even funny. So if you disagree with the value, which happens, I get it. Your process is to reach out to, in some way, the lender. That might be through the buyer's agent, but ultimately the buyer and or the lender has to have a problem with our value to be able to, and then ultimately the lender then has to order a new appraisal or request us for a change, a revision, an update, anything like that, we have to get from the lender in most normal sales.
And then VA has a process called Tidewater, which I think is fantastic. If an appraisal does come in low, or if I'm doing an appraisal on Anthony's house and it's like, I'm coming in low,
Typical.
if I'm getting, yeah, exactly. If I think I'm coming in low, I'll notify a VA and be like, I need to start the Tidewater process. And this gives them time to shoot out messages to the buyer's agent and the seller's agent saying the appraiser's having a tough time coming up with comps. Send us what you got. So then you can send comps and we can go through this whole process before I actually turn my appraisal in. I will say Tidewater does not mean I'm gonna come in low. I've done Tidewater multiple times where I've appraised it out. But if I feel like I'm gonna get close to that number, or if I think it's gonna come in low, I'll ask for more data. And then sometimes that data is good enough to help. I mean, whether that be additional offers that you had or additional comps, but you do have that option or VA if the appraisal comes in low that, or if you hear a Tidewater, that it means the appraiser is getting close to coming in low, but you can send them more data.
There's a,
So are you saying I can't just call you and yell at you?
You can.
you can do that too. That's okay. There, I got this sheet of questions, so I gotta look at them real quick. We touched on that one. What is your current criteria when doing comp searches? I think I'm safe saying every appraiser does this just a little bit differently. For me, I look at neighborhood specifically. I know one appraiser, really well known. She uses grade school is her criteria. I look at more of like geographic boundaries more than anything. If I can't, like, for example, I think Christie had touched on a rural property, probably somewhere southeast, because you were touching on Lawrence. In that situation, like when I'm using southeast, I'm not even looking at 3 miles. I don't give a damn how far it is. If it's a berm on 15 acres, I'm going to Washburn Rural, I'm going to Seaman, I'm going everywhere looking for that comp. And usually underwriters are okay with that, as long as you explain why the heck you did it.
I had to explain myself to lenders and to
Yeah.
appraisers, like, how did you just call me out?
There's,
How did you get your number? And I had taken like 3 properties because I couldn't find one specific to match.
Yeah.
I said, just as long as you can show me how you got to your number, I can go from there.
yeah, and and there in town or in town settings, there are different neighborhood boundaries. Okay, those neighborhood boundaries, yeah, I get it. A lot of times school district is a value factor, right? It's frowned upon for us to say, and I understand that, but a lot of times what you see is like natural ones, like waterways, or man-made ones like highways, separate market boundaries. And we have quite a few of that here in town with the Shunga, with 470 bypass, I-70, the Kansas River, Highway 24. We've got a lot of natural and man-made boundaries. That does not mean we can't cross that boundary. For me, it is more about, if I don't have any, like, this is actually really good. If this is my neighborhood and this is my boundary that I think it is geographically, and I know that these aren't anything like it, but I know that this one, if I'm showing a buyer houses here, they'll totally look here because they're the same damn houses. I'm looking here and here, but I leave this out. So I might report that these houses sell for what they sell for and that they're bigger or smaller or whatever. But I just tell people, or tell in my report, I type why I've done what I did. And that is the biggest thing for us as far as not getting our hands slapped and getting a revision, is just explain why you didn't stay within a half mile of the subject. Why'd you go 1.2 miles away? Generally speaking, I think if you're in town, you've probably got enough data to have at least 2 out of 3 sales within that same neighborhood, a quarter mile to a half mile away. Sometimes it's just not possible.
That's a good point, because I've talked to Anthony about this, where if I'm like, Sherwood Park's a great example. If I can't find a decent comp in Sherwood Park because they just got a range of different quality houses, I'll call Anthony and be like, if you were listing this house, or if you were selling this house, where else would you take this buyer?
Yeah.
And so that's a good way to think about it. If you're in a neighborhood that you can't find a comp for, think to yourself, where else would a buyer buy a house?
Yeah, because that's your market.
And that's, yeah. So that's how I think about it. If I'm struggling for comps in a certain area, I'll think about where else do these buyers buy houses at? Or, yeah.
I should have read this beforehand.
Great.
Question for Anthony. Is it true that you are in fact the best appraiser in Topeka, but Ben Moser is funnier, better looking and better at golf? Listen,
Yes.
let's talk about this. Whoever asshole typed this.
Brewster, there we go.
Okay, damn you. This is all true.
Look me in the eye when you respond to me.
This is all true. This is all absolute true. I am way better at Ben at my job. Way better. But arguably, he is better looking. Funnier, bullshit. He won the city in golf. I mean, come on, how, I'm not even invited to that.
Just checking.
That's not fair.
I registered for the start tournament. I wanted who I'm asking to play with.
Yeah, definitely Ben. Unless you're looking to black out and have a good time, then I'm.
Maybe a little bit of that.
Hey, that's it.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Sweet. I do want to touch on one thing, and then if you have any other questions, bring them up, but the MLS board has put some guidance out there on how to deal with additional dwelling units. Back in last year, the city of Topeka is now allowing them in the city of Topeka. And so I just want to basically state that if you think your property has an additional dwelling unit, the few things to look at are zoning, R1, R2, R3. If it's in that and it's got additional unit that is under 800 square feet, that can be classified as an additional dwelling unit if that property can be lived in. It needs a kitchen, it needs a sleeping area, it needs a bathroom.
Can I put my plug in here?
Yeah,
Okay, so we collectively would rather you input an ADU incorrectly than not at all.
Yeah.
Because it is really hard for us to find ADU comparable sales, homes with guest houses or living quarters for your mother-in-law, whoever. It's hard to find those sales as our system currently is. So the fact that we're starting this, moving forward, building a database, I'd rather you put something in there that has a kitchenette, a bedroom and a bathroom, but maybe no stove. Maybe it's got a dishwasher, a fridge, a garbage disposal, and they gotta put a microwave oven on the counter. Please count that. I know that that's not FHA's rule, that's not HUD's rule, that's not the county's rule, I don't care. Put it in there wrong because we need that data. We'll adjust for the lack of stove or something. We'll figure that out, but not having it is the biggest problem for us.
even if you're in a market that it's an illegal use or not allowed use, put it in there because that area has value. It might not have value as an additional dwelling unit, but it has contributing value to the property as a whole.
Amanda, tell me what I did wrong.
I just want distinction that then is talking about zoning laws.
Yeah.
And we have MLS definitions and rules, and these are separate things because we serve a lot of zones in a lot of cities. And so by all means, listen to him talk about the zoning laws, but stick to the MLS instructions when you're inputting.
Yeah, there's specific guidelines that we've come out with to how you put them into MLS. So check those out if you've got them. It'll make our job easier to reduce phone calls and additional thinking for you guys. when we call you.
You'd find for that.
If any progress on, adding any value to solar panels to residents?
Yeah,
Doozy.
solar panels are just one of those interesting things. I honestly don't really give them much value. I've got to prove the values there. There's different ways to do it mathematically through things called a discount cash flow or just different other things, but it's like, if I can't see that solar panel added value, then I'm not gonna adjust for it. And 9 times out of 10, they're not fully owned, so they are leased or on a purchase power plan, and that also affects the buyer's thoughts on how, am I gonna have to tear these things out? I don't want them. How are we gonna get rid of them? Some secondary market won't accept a leased power, or they don't want us to value solar panels if they're leased. They only want them if they're owned.
Yeah, I give you an example. I appraised a church about 6 months ago and that it was selling. And during that process, the solar panels were $250,000 on this facility. And that buyer was, with the electrical savings and all of that, they were contributing about $110,000 in that scenario. So we had to give them some value, obviously. But I had one about a year and a half ago that was a residential home, of course, residents on acreage in Shawnee Heights. They had 35,000 still owed on the property. They were asking what they were asking through the negotiation process, got under contract 2 weeks out before closing, realized this lease was there or this purchase agreement. And they ended up reducing the sale price by the exact amount of what was owed on the solar panels. So in that case, that was a negative. It's again, market by market, but until we get more data on them reflecting that people are willing to pay more and lenders are willing to lend more on them, it's really hard for us to give them a whole lot of consideration in some situations anyway. Not a good answer, but there you go.
Can you give some information on how you guys come up with values on properties that are the first of their kind, so like the new 3D printed homes down, or you don't have to go that's not a big difference. Or, when subdivisions are putting in new duplexes in an area where there's never been a duplex before, how do you compare that to a 50s or 60s duplex and get that new construction value?
Thanks. So I'll give you an example of this. I appraised a shipping container home about 2 years ago up north. We don't have a lot of those around here. So that was a bitch. I charged more money for it. So what I did is I took an online class that was offered at the time. I think it was, I can't remember who did it now. And it taught you about the process of building them. That was, I say an online class, it was like 2 hours. Okay, it wasn't that intensive. I researched the brand of shipping container. What's the estimated shelf life or weathered life, if you will? How long do they last if you repaint them after 10 years of living? And learn that they actually, I mean, I learned a lot about this, like what the lifespan of a steel shipping container was. I did not use the cost approach. Let's start there. And a lot of people say you should. I get that. I had no way to do that because the shipping containers cost $8,000 and then he was finishing it himself and I had no data to support what this thing was going to cost. I looked at it kind of as a unique and complex property, if you will. I looked at geodesic dome homes. I looked at not even earth contact, but like true berms, like Flintstone looking houses, Hobbit homes. Just any kind of unique property that I could use to compare to that, because I think the person that was willing to look at that home and consider buying it is obviously someone that doesn't care what their neighbor lives in. They're going to live in something because they liked the energy efficiency of it. They liked the fact that it was minimalistic. They wanted more of the setting and the surrounding atmosphere than a traditional walkout ranch or a story and a half. So you get a little creative and you just think about what that buyer, what else would they look at if they're interested in buying this home? If they wanted a 3D printed home, what else would they look at? Maybe they don't need a basement then. So we're looking at slab homes. Maybe this home is, again, all concrete walls and that home has sheetrock walls and 2x4 framing. In that situation, we probably would look at cost data because we have it. So we did be able to adjust on cost figures on which one costs more, which one costs less, things like that. But as far as sales, I'd be looking at similar sales, ignoring construction type. Just what else would that person look at? And I think generally speaking, those 3D printed homes, there's a builder here in town that builds slab on grade homes, 2-car garages. Sometimes they're 1-car garages. And I think that builder is going to be the same market appeal as this new 3D printed homes project.
Sort of the same price range.
Yeah, because don't sue me. It's an affordable home that is newer compared to the surrounding homes. And you're right, they're in areas that are 60 years old, brand new now. So I would go over here and I would go, when this happened 15 years ago, I remember when that was developed up north on Kansas. Anybody remember that? Kind of up by the Kickstart bar. They developed that neighborhood in there and there was all 70-year-old homes on acreage around them. And they threw in neighborhoods full of slab on grades, 3-bed, 1-bath, 1-car garages. I would go back 15 years and I'd say, this is what happened at that time.
Yeah.
The market's changed since then, but this is some data. And I would look at different areas like that that's happened and kind of try to derive an adjustment based on what trends have done in the past. And it's a long process. It's not fun, but I'll give that assignment to Ben.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question? I feel like I might have just beat around it for 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
There's really no good answer.
Yeah.
We're stuck with what we have in the market is basically what you wanted to say, but you took 15 minutes to say it.
Yep.
We have to use what's available out there. There's no magic. There's no magic. And then I want to just say before we're done, and I know Anthony feels the same, I view you guys all as experts in this market, just like us. So if you ever have questions or anything, call us, ask us questions, we'll answer anything. I mean, if you want to ask us about comps, ask us about sales, if you need to get a deal done quick and it's a local lender, we can probably fit you in. But yeah, I view both, all of you guys as experts as well, so I don't view myself above you. I want to collaborate with you to make sure we can do the best we can to value these homes for your clients.
Yeah, you are our data sources.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys, what you type on the MLS, when we call you looking for information, you are the market participants and the people that work directly with them. So we need your data. And if you need help from us, we'll reciprocate.
Amber, you go first.
I just love that you guys are like that. I feel like when I first started, it was a big like appraisers and realtors don't get along, don't call them, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like that's really changed and I appreciate you guys being willing to.
The hard part for us is we're not supposed to talk to you guys. They say we're not supposed to talk to you guys. We're not supposed to talk to lenders, but we can't do our job without talking to you guys, knowing what your clients are doing. So I think that's very important.
I want to point out what Anthony just said.
Oh,
We are an MLS collaborative, working together.
Yeah.
When we just recently did a bunch of MLS feedback sessions, the most frequent comment we received was complaints about minimal or bad data in the MLS. So particularly if you're entering a sold before print because you want the volume, please don't half-ass your data entry. I understand you may not have interior pictures like you would if you were listing the house. But, at least tell people what the interior condition was like. The whole point of allowing agents to put stuff that's already been sold on the MLS so you can get the volume is so everybody else can get the comp. But if we don't have enough information about the property to use it as a comp, we may as well not even be putting it in there.
Yeah.
So
I want to add something to that real quick. If you are doing that and it's a family sale or some kind of irregular non-market value sale, please put that in there too. I looked at a house today that was sold before print. And I understand the agent wants the volume, but it was between a father and a daughter. Well, that's not a true arm's length market value sale.
Yeah.
That's.
was it marked arm's length?
Huh?
Was it marked arm's length?
I don't know.
Oh.
It hasn't closed yet, but I just
Oh.
assume it's gonna be marked wrong because it is 90.
there's an agent I spoke to a few months ago that works it every other time.
Yeah.
Arm's length, non-arm's length, arm's length, non-arm's length, because they don't know what it means. I'm like, we're gonna have lunch.
We have those kind of definitions on MLS, so check those out because there's a lot of confusion between arm's length, non-arm's length. So yeah, the more data on sold before prints would be fantastic.
Especially interior condition.
It was more so by owners say that.
So if you like upload, or like, something, you can go back and change them or update them.
So once the listing has been marked sold, agents don't have a high enough security level to change that listing. But your broker does, any of your brokerage office staff normally access the whole brokerage's listings. They can change sold listings. I can help you change a sold listing, or Denise can. So, a sold listing can be updated after the first time it was marked sold, just not by the agent, especially if we've changed it to house not member, because then it's not even your listing anymore. But we are happy to help you add details, the listing usable by other people.
Cool. Any other things before we leave? Nothing. Cool.
You guys leave us any sandwiches?
Thank you. Thank you everybody for coming out today. There should be sandwiches.
No, I'm